Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another Live at 5. I am your curator, Kevin Adkisson, from the Cranbrook Center for Collections and Research. And today I am bringing you a very special tour from a building that I imagine some of you have attended as parents. I know some of you have worked on. I am honored to have some of the architects who worked on this, who helped build this project. But if you are a regular of Cranbrook for tours, for exhibits, you probably have never been here. And that is the Cranbrook Kingswood Middle School for Girls. It is one of the most recent buildings to open on campus. It opened for classes in the fall of 2011, so it's slightly newer than the collections wing, slightly older than many of the Millennium projects or the Cranbrook Vision projects, like the addition to the Institute of Science and the Natatorium and those projects. And I think it's really interesting to be looking at a building, a typology that we don't hear a lot about in the sort of architectural profession, which is middle school architecture. There's plenty of literature and writing about high school and college architecture or primary school architecture, but not a ton on middle schools. And it's also interesting to be here as a curator at Cranbrook and be talking about a building that's so new and that wasn't touched by the hand of Eliel Saarinen. But as we'll see on our walkthrough of the building, it was certainly touched by the spirit of Saarinen, and the architects at Lake Flato really learned important lessons from the Saarinen buildings and then applied them to the middle school for girls. So if you haven't been to campus in the last decade, this used to be the spot of the girls' tennis courts. The tennis courts were replaced with the middle school for girls, which, as I mentioned, opened in 2011. And earlier today, I had a long phone call with the project architect of this building, Greg Pape, who told me that part of building at Cranbrook was terrifying because you don't want to be the first one to build a bad building. Part of it was exhilarating because you were getting to build within one of the most beautiful and rich contexts in the country. And that actually having a site that used to be tennis courts was somewhat empowering because you didn't have to actually be the one who made the decision to cut into the Cranbrook landscape. It was already disturbed. And so when they were thinking about this project, the architects at Lake Flato envisioned it as a connecting piece from the hillside behind the school, below the Institute of Science, and the meadow on the other side of the school, what's now a lacrosse field. The architects of this building were, the firm is called Lake Flato, and Lake Flato was established in 1984. It has offices, the home office in San Antonio and another office in Austin, Texas. There are about 100 people at the Lake Flato office, 50 licensed architects, 42 lead specialists. Those are people who specialize in environmental design. And it was founded by Ted Flato and David Lake. Both are from Texas, from Corpus Christi and from Austin. And they founded their firm in 1984, and they're really known for these sort of straightforward, environmentally sensitive, rigorously contextual buildings that are one with the site and one with the earth. And I think we'll see that today with the middle school for girls, this interest in designing for place, designing within the context of the landscape. As I mentioned, we're nestled between the tree and the meadow. Designing for the climate. There are a lot of moves here that respect the fact that here in Michigan we have 24 months of winter. Then designing with local materials and with local craft traditions, and also designing with the culture of a region or an institution. And so some of those principles are tangible, some of those are just ideas, but I think the girls' middle school really looks at the context of Cranbrook and then builds within it. So just from the outside, the materials that you're seeing are these green glazed bricks, which were inspired by both the tradition of glazed brick here at Cranbrook, like at the Natatorium of 1999, but also in Eero Saarinen's General Motors Technical Center. And the color itself, it picks up the teal of both the original Kingswood copper roof, but also the green lobby at Kingswood. And so this color is very much indebted to Pewabic pottery and its legacy and its connections between Mary Stratton, the potter, and George Booth, Cranbrook's founder. The next material that we only see here at the entrance is this Mankato Kasota limestone. In a lot of Lake Flato buildings, you would see Texas sandstone. Most of their work is in Texas in the American South. But here they use the same stone that Eliel Saarinen used at the Art Museum and that Kingswood is constructed with. Now, this is, unfortunately, just a Mankato Kasota veneer. Remember, at Kingswood, the stone is used as solid load-bearing columns. But by using the veneer, it both kept the building on budget, which made everyone happy, and you're able to put these lights into the portico. Now, the way that it reaches out and brings the students in, it ties back to the designs of Alvar Aalto in his Villa Morena in Finland, one of the great friends of Cranbrook, the Aaltos, but it also connects to the natatorium and the entrance there. So I respect Lake Flato for mining not just the Saarinen past and the Cranbrook Finnish connections, but also the more recent past and those buildings from the 90s. Now, where it doesn't reach out is actually to the students, but a little weather never hurt anyone, and I think architecturally it was absolutely the right move to not run a bus shelter across the entire front of the building. And you can see now, almost a decade on, the way that it's really sort of nestled into the hillside. Now, if you're not familiar with Lake Flato, this is their first building in Michigan, and they're more known for their buildings in Texas. So they have buildings at UT Austin, at Arizona State, UCLA, where the San Antonio Spurs play, the AT&T Center. They also have a cool project, the Porch House, which is a modular home, and then the Briscoe Museum, the Dooseum, and the Whitty Museum in San Antonio. And all of those projects feature this idea of sort of climate, materials, and regional specificity. And so if you think about Texas, how oppressively hot and swamp-like most of the state is, and then you think of Michigan, this sort of snowy tundra, our building is much sort of more enclosed and feels very secure, which with the impending storm, I will head in and feel that security. And so when you head into the building, notice how thin it is. And so you walk into the lobby and you can immediately see straight through the building to the other side. One thing that Greg, the design architect, told me today is that a skinny building is a healthy building. And I think that Eliel Saarinen would have felt the same way. Remember at Kingswood, it's all single-loaded corridors and the building is never more than 65 feet wide. The girls' middle school, though it does have double-loaded corridors, it's a more efficient floor plan and footprint. Every time you turn a corner, you're going to find a window, you're going to find light, and then you're also going to find very constructed views. And so thinking about the architecture of axes and the way that Saarinen connects across campus, he leads our eye either with architectural fragments, with sculpture, with other buildings, or with landscape features. That's something that Lake Flato wanted to do as well. We are looking out at a Carl Milles sculpture from 1948. This is a 2012 casting. If you're familiar with Cranbrook, you know that practically every building has a sculpture by the Swedish sculptor Carl Milles, who was in residence at the Academy of Art from 1931 to 1951. The Ice Dancer was a very late Milles, 1948. 48 to 49. And it was inspired after Millis and Carl and Olga Millis traveled to New York and watched the ice skaters whirling around Rockefeller Center. And so it's a very American sculpture of Millis's. It's inspired by this American icon, the Rockefeller Center ice rink. It's after he has spent a very long time here in America. And so I think it is both perfect topically with this sort of youth ice dancing, but it's also interesting to have a later Millis. If you've watched enough of my tours or read the sculpture guide, you know that most of our Millises were done in the 19-teens and 20s. So an interesting Millis that was given for the girls' middle school here. Now, in the central lobby, we are seeing the same materials from the outside brought inside. So it has this sort of beautiful continuation of the exterior facades, and those green bricks are then picked up here in the Peter and Julie Fisher Cummings lobby and run straight through the building. You'll also notice that the lobby is irregularly shaped. There is no Saarinen building that is perfectly symmetrical, and so the architect picks up on that same idea, both that it is more human, more natural to not have right angles, but also that you can better frame views and direct space if you are turning the walls, sort of kinking the walls at these subtle 10-degree angles. Now, in early designs and early renderings of this space, here would have stood a torchère shining up at the ceiling and reflecting down off of the plywood above. But in the end, this was replaced with a unique design from David Nosenchuk. David is a 1987 graduate of Cranbrook Schools. He went on to study art history at the University of Michigan and then architecture at SciArc in Los Angeles. And he was working in Los Angeles as a furniture maker when he launched his own design series at the International Contemporary Furniture Fair in the year 2000. And at ICFF, he showed a line of furniture and lighting, and he actually won Best in Show for his N1 design. And this is an adaptation of that circa 2000 lamp, unique for Cranbrook. And Nosenchuk is interested in using modern technology with historic forms and historic ideas. And so in the inside here, this is an LED lamp, and then this is water jet cut nickel plated steel. And so it's designed in a computer, cut in a computer, but he wants it to read as this sort of both solid and translucent 3D stained glass piece. And so he's thinking about the long tradition of Saarinen and the way that Saarinen used leaded glass around the campus, how Saarinen lit rooms. And so it is both an homage to Cranbrook's past, and it is a new vision of this sort of technological future. And I think that works for both the light fixture and for this building that is a sort of tribute, homage to Kingswood while also having a new vision. I want to step inside the main office just for a moment. In this office, we see some lovely Florence Knoll furniture. And these are her 1954 designs when Florence was approached with a project in her planning unit and she did not have the furniture that she needed. She said, I'll design it myself. And they're these very flexible, beautiful icons of mid-century modernism. And I think doubly relevant here because Florence Knoll, of course, is a graduate of Kingswood School for Girls, as well as the Art Academy before marrying in and transforming Knoll furniture. Also in this lobby are two sculptures by a former Cranbrook faculty member, Pamela Stump. This one shows a Kingswood girl. She has her field hockey stick, her tennis racket, her softball. Down below is Kitty Kangaroo, cast in bronze. And Pamela Stump taught at Kingswood, taught art and sculpture for many, many decades. And there are multiple of her works at Kingswood. In the corner is one of the Artenica reproductions Saarinen House lamps, student artwork in the window, and then another stump work here. This time it's Kitty Kingswood. And you see that Kitty Kingswood has her books in her crook of her arm, and she is standing on the Kingswood seal down below. And then up in her hand is the K pennant. And if you don't know the original Kitty Kingswood, it is a painting over at Kingswood painted by Eliel Saarinen directly on the wall to cover up a construction mistake. Now, when you enter the school, the first classroom that you encounter is the art room. And this, I always just thought, okay, well, in the layout of the building, this makes the most sense. But in talking to Greg this afternoon, he told me that he was and so he was inspired by the entrance at Kingswood, where you have the Loom Studio on your right, the green lobby on your left, and what that says about an institution to have art right at the front door, instead of sort of putting the messy and weird artist at the back of the school, you put them right at the front door. And so just like at Kingswood, the art classroom is here at the front, I think showing the importance of art to Cranbrook. Now, I hope I'm not losing, I'm on Cranbrook Wi-Fi, but it is really storming here. So I hope I don't lose you again, but just so you know, if you're cutting in and out, that is the cause. Now, we'll turn the other direction here in the hall, and I see the aardvark is mentioned, and we do have an aardvark in cultural properties. Here's another iteration of Kitty Kingswood, and that shows Saarinen's camouflaging of the erroneous drain pipe. So that's over on the third level of Kingswood School. And then this is a doll made in 1950 that shows the same Kitty Kingswood. And I think it's very important that we brought over cultural properties and some of the traditions of the old Kingswood Middle School for Girls, what were called the lower form, here to the new Middle School for Girls. So now we are in the library, and we're seeing the first of many of these smaller, intimate spaces where the girls can gather. The design of the building really held in mind how young girls or grades 6 to 8 move through space, how they feel comfortable in space. And so instead of making big, grand rooms like the sort of Saarinen public spaces at Kingswood, the architects working with the head of schools here at Cranbrook created these much more intimate rooms, these little places where girls can gather in small groups. The width of the hallway is even so that girls can walk 5 abreast, arm in arm. And so this is one of those first spaces here in the library where they can sit beside the fireplace. Up on the ceiling of the library is a design by Eliel Saarinen, the bottle cap lamps. And these lamps were originally used in Kingswood's Heaven, which is the 4th or 6th floor ballroom at the top of Kingswood School. That room didn't meet fire code the day the school opened and had been closed for many years, used as a residence. And so you'll see the rest of the bottle cap lamps worked their way over here. So taking important architectural designs from the older school and now using them here. The corner that you see there is another example of these intimate spaces where girls can gather, and so they can sort of sit on these upholstery pieces. They can sit on their myelin step stool designed for Noel, and they can sort of gather, gossip, look out at the sports field or the meadow behind, and then you also have the view back to the building. And so always thinking about where you're looking out, not just bringing in light, but also framing views. Of course, we are a very modern school, and so you see here the 3D printer that the girls can use. They recently won the NASA Cubes in Space competition, and so there is Kingswood Middle School for Girls work floating up above us right now. Also on the wall of the library is this piece by Dan Hoffman. Dan Hoffman is an architect who studied at the Cooper Union under Haydock, and who was here at Cranbrook after Daniel Libeskind. He was here from 1986 to 1996. You know Dan Hoffman if you've ever visited Cranbrook and come through the Woodward Avenue entrance or seen our light fixtures along the street. Those are Hoffman designs. This is a sculpture that was part of his exhibit called Natural History's Biologic Constructions that was at the Art Museum in 1988. And these design was meant to be inspired by 19th century botanic drawings turned into a settlement. And he called it settlement as this sort of architectural fantasy. It was renamed Community by Dr. Lillian Bowder, who was head of schools in 1983 and president of Cranbrook Educational Community from 84 to 96. And so if you ever visited Dr. Bowder at her home, this hung for a long time over her dining room, and it is on long-term loan to the schools now. Moving on, we will head next into the other public spaces, and the building does have this very clear division between public and private space, or public and academic spaces. So the next place is the gym, which has a different roof construction, less insulation, and I can really hear the storm. Those of you who have to suffer through looking at the Wenger gym, you know that Saarinen did not design a gymnasium alongside the original Kingswood School, and it had that addition in 1960. This gym is integral to the whole design, and so when you drive into Cranbrook late in the evening, you'll know that you can look straight through this giant glass wall from the main Cranbrook Road, and then you can see the back wall of the gym, where one day I would love to have an Academy of Art artist do a mural, because I do think that that window, intentionally or not, it is like a lantern coming in off of the road, in much the same way that Saarinen has his golden lantern at the Institute of Science. Now, the gym is the largest room in the building, and so the architects buried it inside of the hill so that when you see the middle school from above, you're actually looking down and sort of across the gymnasium, and it really helps the scale of the building. Next is the lunchroom, the dining hall, which has sort of Saarinen-inspired light fixtures, lovely bent plywood chairs, and which looks out again over the meadow. And I think it's great that the architect insisted on calling it a meadow and not a lacrosse field, because the architects, we all love sort of design purity and thinking that our buildings are floating in sort of uninterrupted land. And it does read as a meadow successfully from the building. Now, the girls can eat inside, they get their food here, and then they could also eat outside along the porch there. And since 2017, they have eaten alongside a tapestry by Lillian Holm. Now, Lillian Holm immigrated from Sweden to Bloomfield Hills in 1929. She had been trained at the Bostad School of Handicraft, and she immigrated specifically to work for Loya Saarinen and the weaving workshops of Studio Loya Saarinen. Lillian Holm was working as a commercial weaver. She was also instructing at Kingswood School as of 1933. So she came as an employee for the commercial weaving workshop, and then she stayed on as weaving instructor until 1965 when she returned to Sweden. She gave this piece to Kingswood headmistress Marion Goodale, who was the headmistress who first lived in what we call Robin Hill now. And so this hung at Robin Hill in the 50s and 60s. And then Mrs. Goodale gave it to her niece, who is also a Kingswood graduate, Jane Shoemaker Wimmer. And Mrs. Wimmer gave it to the middle school in 2017. And Mrs. Wimmer writes that it was Lillian Holm who inspired a lifelong love of weaving and handcraft and textiles. And so she wanted to give this piece back to the middle school so that young girls could also see the work of one of our most important faculty members, Lillian Holm. The design of it dates to the early 50s, and it shows a skyscraper. So you're looking through the sort of canyon, this very urban scene for our very much suburban campus. And there is a sort of coordinating tapestry that's quite beautiful that's in the collection of the Flint Institute of Art, where Mrs. Holm also taught, that shows a similar sort of skyscraper scene. As we move back, we'll look at some of the classrooms. And I love the way that the building sort of winds around. One thing I learned in architecture school, when you're in a building designed by an architect, always make sure you check out the bathrooms, because they will always have some interesting feature. And I really love this sort of diva on a dime flourish of these floating squares. Pretty great bathroom. And when I say that the building was built on a dime, it really was. It was a very sort of budget-friendly building, budget-conscious, which those kind of limits can really actually help an architect. It's helpful to have some sort of restraint or limit on you when you are designing. And so Greg told me that he wanted the building to be very thoughtful in a very poetic way, but to come in at budget. And so in order to do that, they had to make really smart decisions about how the building systems worked, how the layout was, what materials they used. And so instead of importing materials, they used things like Baltic birch plywood, which comes from the Upper Peninsula. They used on the floor, you'll notice that it's just ground concrete. So it has a really beautiful aggregate in it, and then it's polished to this finish. So unlike Sarnen, who did have concrete subfloors, but then covered them with battleship linoleum and then rugs, this is the foundation of the building, and then it's used as the floor as well. Now we're coming to the first of 3 nodes. So the building is arranged by grade. So this is the 6th grade hallway. The 6th grade students, of course, left unexpectedly, and so we're working on getting their contents of their lockers back to them, which is what's in the brown bags. Each of the grade levels has this very domestic scale to it. It's this very narrow hall that looks out again towards the meadow, and then each of the classrooms are absolutely flooded with light. So you have here this great corner of glass, and notice there's screens over the windows, so in nicer weather you can actually open it and have natural air, something I wish my high school had had. And you look both out at the meadow, but then you can also look back across the sort of rain garden. You can see the ice dancer popping out just through the trees. Originally, these rain gardens, they're part of what makes the school so sustainable in order to keep the stormwater from rushing and flooding into the city drains or flooding the Kingswood Lake. These gardens are meant to stop the rainwater from the roof and then slow it down and water these plants. And the concept was developed by Peter Osler, who designed the herb family garden of Michigan plants at the Institute of Science and who was the landscape architect for the natatorium as well. All of the classrooms open up and they have the windows that bring light into the hallway here. It is just a 1-floor building. It does meet all sorts of accessibility codes, and so every student is welcome here, and the building really works for all different types of students. It is just girls here at the middle school. In the old lower forms, the Cranbrook was single-sex. It has been single-sex since the boys' school was founded in 27 and the girls' school in 31. They combined in 1985, but it's thought from sort of adolescent development psychology that it is better to have single-sex education at the middle school years. So in a few weeks, we will tour the middle school for boys, which is in the 1931 J. Robert F. Swanson designed Vaughn School. It moved there in 81. The girls' middle school was in the basement of Kingswood until 2011 when this opened. The science rooms are on the front of the school. They have these functional but slightly hideous rolling desk chairs that are all the rage in academia. And what's cool about how this is arranged is that if I go back and I show you the hallway here, these are all 6th grade classrooms. Here is the French room, and notice where the French room opens up to the main hallway, and the science classroom is the same way into the main hallway. So that if you are a student and you're in French, you don't have to enter the sort of sacred space of the 6th graders. They stay where they are, they stay in the sort of homey corner. And then the classrooms that are to multiple grade levels open to this main space. Now, the whole spine zigzags back and forth. So you'll see that we make a zig here, and then we zag forward. And the architect wanted to stop this from being a sort of bowling alley where you could just look down and be intimidated by the scale of your school. So you never see the sort of full length of the building. You always have these shorter hallways, and they're very wide so that the students can move in sort of clusters of friends. And then they have these places where they can hang out with soft seating here. And then there are niches that are built in where pieces of the Cranbrook collection can be displayed. So this is part of our cultural properties collection, which are important works used at the Cranbrook community, not part of the art museum, part of the Cranbrook collection. This is by Gary Griffin, who was the head of the metalsmithing department at the Academy of Art from 1984 until 2006. He's now working in New Mexico. And this is a morning glory that Gary Griffin made out of wrought iron. You also know Gary Griffin. He did the gates that are on Academy Way. And then there are these sort of group rooms where the 6th graders can meet and where they can have sort of study hall or a grade level meeting. There are about 60 students per grade, and so all 60 can fit in this room. But it's also the drama room, so you have the stage with the stage lights there. And what's neat about these multi-purpose rooms is that they fit the whole grade level, but it keeps it from having to have sort of rigorous room functions. So unlike the art room or the science classrooms, these performing arts spaces serve multiple purposes. And I think in 2011, that was very unusual to think that a school would commit to having this sort of flexible space. More popular now, but you saw it here first at the Middle School for Girls, where both the drama, chorus, and dance rooms are also these sort of flexible study halls. We've made it down to the 7th grade, which is announced by the Philosopher Chimpanzee, by the sculptor Marshall Fredericks. If you're a Detroiter, you know Marshall Fredericks for his Spirit of Detroit downtown, or the Flying People in Birmingham and in Ferndale. Marshall Fredericks was at Cranbrook from 1932 until 1942, mostly at the Art Academy, but he did teach at Kingswood School in 1933. This is the Philosopher Chimpanzee from 1950. And this was a gift from Julie Daly Lockhart to the girls' middle school. So this is part of their cultural properties collection. And then the next public room is the chorus room. And so in here, it's another one of these flexible spaces. And notice how the roof is inclining up, and so it brings in more of this light. Western-facing building, so you get a nice afternoon sun coming in. And here we can see some masterpieces made by the girls' middle school art department. And one of the great things about coming to middle school here at Cranbrook Kingswood is that you get to really study with master artists, many of whom were educated at the Art Academy. But even more than your instructors, you are getting to be on a campus that is surrounded by art. And so every year I take the Middle School for Girls on a tour of the Frank Lloyd Wright Smith House. They come to the Saarinen House. They go to the Art Museum. And so the curriculum is not just making clay masterpieces and glazing them, but it's learning about the history of clay, learning about different cultures' uses of clay, seeing clay within the Cranbrook collections, and then coming back and incorporating those lessons into your artwork. Here you see another one of the rain gardens that is quite beautifully overgrown, with the rocks sort of cascading down to the meadow behind it. As we look at the outside of the building here, you'll see the second material beyond the glazed brick. There are these concrete blocks, and these concrete blocks were selected to match the color of the bark of the trees behind the school. So those trees by the Institute of Science, these blocks are meant to mirror the forest glen. And so the architect had to ship dozens of samples here to campus and then laid them out and finally found the perfect color of this long concrete block. And you'll notice that they do have this longer length. If it was a brick, we would call it a Norman brick. I'm not sure if it's called a Norman concrete block, but maybe we can make that happen. And it's a similar sort of texture and finish, this rough or smooth sandblast finish that shows all of the aggregate of the concrete and then the coordinated mortar that calls out that same dark brown color. As we move on, we've gotten to the 8th grade. So again, you have science on the left, you have languages on the right, both opening to the main corridor. And then you have the hallway with the 8th grade classrooms. I did not point out the 7th grade classrooms, but I promise they're there. And we get to the end of the school, which is the dance studio. You'll notice that the lights have cut off from my setup of the building. The building is super environmentally friendly, and so it was designed following LEED standards, Leadership in Environmental Engineering and Design, which are the federal standards for new building construction. There are certain steps that you have to go through to become LEED certified. On our $10 million budget, those steps were never pursued. So it was built with LEED principles in mind, but it was never evaluated for LEED certification. Hello, everyone. This is the largest room besides the gym and the dining hall. And so this is where they both have their dance classes, but then the 8th graders who have gotten larger than the 6th graders have enough space to meet as a whole class. So as we turn around, you'll see that the building works in 2 directions. So we're led again by a sculptural niche, and there are more sort of soft seating corners here where the girls can gather. I'm looking through to see if you have any questions. One question that you might have is, how did we choose Lake Flato, a San Antonio-based architect, for our building here? Well, it's a story that I've not quite gotten out, but we did hire multiple different architects. They couldn't seem to come up with a scheme that was satisfactory to all the parties involved. And Arliss Seibert, the longtime head of schools here at Cranbrook, she took a tour as part of an independent school conference of the Sayre School in Lexington, Kentucky, which is a 150-year-old preparatory school. And Lake Flato had built an addition to the Sayre School that Mrs. Seibert correctly identified as blending the sort of historic campus and the historic fabric of Lexington into a new, efficient building. And she felt it had these real sort of handcrafted details. And so she came back to Cranbrook and she told Greg Horschmeyer of Capital Projects that she knew the architect who could do the job, and at the same time, Lake Flato had won the 2004 American Institute of Architects Firm of the Year award, so they were sort of abuzz with popularity. And so when Lake Flato came for the interview, they saw in the corner of the conference room 2 banker boxes that were referred to as the coffins, which had some 80 other blueprints from other architects. I don't know how many actually there were, but it was a struggle to find an architect who was up to the challenge of building this wonderful middle school on a budget for a special place for a specific program and mode of education. And Lake Flato did get the commission in 2004 and then worked on the project a long gestation period to its opening here in 2011. Arliss used to say that this was the one building on campus she got no complaints about, and it really has served us quite well. The building is popular, it is beautiful, it is, I think, a showcase for the parents who come and see Cranbrook. The girls love it, we love using it for community-wide events. I do occasionally have tours that come through here with college students who are studying school design. And so I think it does hold up to the sort of Cranbrook legacy of building and construction. Thank you so much for joining us on this tour of the Cranbrook Kingswood Middle School for Girls. I hope that you have enjoyed it. I hope that you're all staying safe and keeping busy. And next week, we will be coming with another Live at 5, Wednesday at 5 o'clock from another location on campus. I'm not quite sure what next week will be. We also have on Tuesday and Thursday Live at 5 tours on the Cranbrook Center Instagram account. The last question, has Cranbrook ever considered hiring a classicist? That is a great question, and I will try to answer that in a message to you, or maybe with another Live at 5. I'm not sure that we would go classical. Sarna never went classical. Cranbrook is a campus of sort of adaptation of classical principles and proportions, but transformed into something new and a sort of new vocabulary. I think here at the Middle School for Girls, you see this sort of hodgepodge of source material that's put into a pressure cooker, combined with the history of modernism, and then something new, special is cranked out. So thanks for watching. I hope that you've enjoyed this tour. Be safe, and I'll see you next week live at 5. Kevin Adkison coming to you from the Cranbrook Center for Collections and Research.